The Public Protector Adv Busisiwe Mkhwebane still embroiled in legal battles this afternoon. A new bid this time to try and prevent Parliament from continuing with its bid to impeach her while she waits for other processes. Last week, the Parliamentary Committee investigating whether she is fit to remain in office said it would go ahead with its probe into her conduct. Meanwhile, Mkhwebane herself has claimed she's doing the right thing, and that, like the biblical figure of Esther, she would be doing the right thing in breaking the law, and that if she perishes, she perishes. Well, Professor Cathy Powell is an Associate Professor of Public Law at UCT. Professor Powell, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. The Public Protector seems to be claiming that she's actually upholding the law and doing the correct moral thing in her fight to stay in office. How do you see what she said when she's quoted the Bible in this way?
Well, I think she's talking nonsense. I think this is an attempt to paint herself with a brush of righteousness. It's actually a claim from quite a long time ago, in 2019, when some of the battles were hotting up. She quoted in a press statement that I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish, quoting Esther from the Bible. And she has carried on with that attitude ever since, that she's fighting in the cause of righteousness, but more than that, that she's somehow herself a victim of the abuse of power. And I think the point that it gets constantly ignored by herself and overridden by the presentation that she makes is that she actually represents and acts for an extremely powerful office. And that power needs to be held to account. So I'm interested that in her latest representations and complaints about Parliament, she's talking about her rights being violated. She's not talking about the rights that she's meant to be upholding as public protector.
In other words, the public protector is supposed to be about the public, not the protector.
Indeed. Well put, yeah.
I mean, this gets to the issue where we've seen the office, and I know last week she was asked in Parliament how much of your budget, your legal budget, have you spent on cases sort of defending your own position, and she actually, as I understand it, did not provide an answer. I mean, this gets to the nub of the issue in a way, that the office seems to be concentrating on, the resources are being spent on protecting her rather than investigating cases.
In fact, it's actually not about the public protector anymore. It's about the incumbent. It's about Mkhwebane herself. This was a point made recently by counsel Stephen Budlander attempting to counteract yet another attempt by Advocate Mkhwebane to put the courts between herself and Parliament, is that it's actually not about the office. It's about herself. And she is using public funds to keep herself in an office for which she has demonstrated she is unfit to work. And the whole job of Parliament is to check all this evidence and to decide, do we keep her or not? Because keeping her could be doing damage. And remember, we've already had this report by a panel a year ago, finding 3 pages worth of prima facie evidence at the end of a very careful examination of not only incompetence but misconduct, the dishonesty by the woman who claims to be the public protector. Now, she's saying that Parliament is damaging her office by holding the impeachment. What's actually happening is Parliament's trying to protect the office by making sure that the wrong person isn't running it. So I think going back to the biblical reference that she used and the kind of argument that she's held throughout, she's trying to, it's a sleight of hand to move the emphasis from the job she's supposed to be doing to how much she's suffering because people are being mean to her.
I suppose, there's another question around whether she's upholding the law. She believes she is. And if I were to argue against her for a moment, the fact that she has lost so many cases would suggest that she can't claim that she's upholding the law. If she was, then, the top judges in the land would agree with her.
Indeed.
And up until this point, they simply don't.
She's been a past master at simply ignoring the evidence against her. I think one of my most frustrating experiences of this was when her Vrede Dairy report was taken on review to the North Gauteng High Court. And she made a couple of arguments to this court trying to justify the very, very serious improprieties of that report. And the court, in its judgment, very carefully and at length dealt with each of her justifications and explained why each justification did not hold water. And her public response after that to the press and to the public was, well, she's astonished that the court could hold this because, and then she proceeded to repeat all the justifications she'd made to the court and that the court had dealt with. So she has this way of simply not noticing evidence that is against her.
There's another issue around the law and what people might call the abuse of law. Now, in this country, like in many other democracies and countries with legal systems, you have a right to an appeal. And until very recently, as I understood it, one court made one decision on one issue once. So, in other words, if I believe that the Kaiser Chiefs penalty should not have been the penalty, I would go to the High Court, I would lose, I would appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal, I would lose, I would go to the Constitutional Court, I would lose, it's Kaiser Chiefs we're talking about, Professor, and that would be the end of it. That's not what's happening here. She seems to have gone to the Constitutional Court 3 times on this one issue.
Yes, and that is plainly against the law. I cannot believe she doesn't know it. What she's claiming is the right to a rescission. Now, it was Zuma who opened this can of worms, and I think the Constitutional Court made a grave error in even hearing his rescission application to their judgment against him. They heard it, but then turned it down. But they should not have heard it because the Constitutional Court has a point where it decides whether it's even going to hear a case. And I think the problem was that it agreed to hear the case. What it's done with the public protector's appeal for a rescission is refused to hear the case, said, look, we can't see any reason, any grounds for rescission, so we're not going to hear that. Now she's trying to get that decision rescinded. So the decision not to rescind is now being appealed against as though it were another rescission application. What she's using here is the fact that there was a leak about what the first decision was going to be. It's not a leak. I mean, it's bad that there was the leak, but it's not a leak that has any bearing on the merits of the decision not to grant a rescission, if you're following me. So what she's doing is she's bringing up something completely irrelevant in an attempt to yet again get the Constitutional Court to hear a rescission application, and all of that is being done so that she can keep the impeachment proceedings from going ahead in Parliament. So she's using the Constitutional Court as an obstacle, as a very transparent obstacle where it doesn't belong, to prevent Parliament from carrying out its constitutional duty.
There's another issue here, which is, again, if I were to impute a motive to the public protector, if I were to suggest that this is all deliberate, if you have court case after court case after court case, it's easy for people watching this to get very confused. I'm not a legal academic, but I am supposed to be someone who watches the public protector, as my job, and I get confused. I mean, that does work as a deliberate political strategy, perhaps, if someone were to try and do that deliberately.
Well, I think we've seen that happening more and more. It is a huge threat to the rule of law, where legal arguments, legal cases are brought not to convince the court, because the applicant knows that the argument has no chance, that it's completely invalid. But the applicant brings the case to convince the public or to convince a